Welcome to the debate. Imagine you go out and buy a fleet of company cars. You pay a flat sticker price, you hand the keys to your employees, and you think your transportation budget is set for the year.
Right. A nice, clean capital expense.
Exactly. But then a month later, you get a completely separate invoice in the mail charging you for every single mile driven. Then you notice a surcharge every time a driver turns on the radio, and a premium fee just for looking in the rearview mirror.
And the best part? None of these invoices actually tell you which employee drove which car.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. But for enterprise finance and IT teams deploying Microsoft 365 Copilot right now, here in mid-2026, that exact nightmare is a reality.
It really is. We are witnessing the absolute shattering of the traditional software as a service illusion here. The industry spent, a decade getting comfortable with clean, deterministic, per-seat licensing, but Copilot has fundamentally changed the financial mechanics of productivity software.
And that is exactly what we are digging into today. We are looking at a substantive tension right at the heart of modern enterprise AI. Is Copilot's shift to a highly complex metered consumption model a natural, entirely justifiable cost of unlocking autonomous AI productivity,
or is it a fragmented budgeting landmine that breaks IT forecasting and leaves finance teams flying totally blind?
Now, I represent the position that this landscape is an architecture that rewards technical discipline. It is a sophisticated pricing model that, when you govern it with modern FinOps practices, delivers an undeniable return on investment. Pay the cost of doing modern AI business and move on.
Well, I represent the position of the battle-scarred FinOps leads on the ground, because I look at this exact same architecture and see a structural budgeting trap. IT and finance teams are buying what they genuinely believe is a flat-rate $30 SaaS seat, only to be completely blindsided. The native visibility is severely lacking, and until a company builds a customized manual reconciliation pipeline to stitch these invoices together, they are just guessing at their AI spend.
I get the anxiety around that, I do. But let's bring some clarity to what is actually happening under the hood. Let's start with those 4 billing planes you mentioned, because understanding the structural reality of the invoice is the first step to taming it.
Sure. People complain that the flat rate is an illusion, but it's really just the foundation. Plane 1 is exactly what people expect, the $30 per user per month enterprise add-on. You buy that through Microsoft 365 Commerce, just like your Office licenses.
Right. And if the story ended there, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But it doesn't. Plane 2 introduces the consumption meter, the Copilot Credits. These run in the background, billed as pay-as-you-go at exactly 1 cent per credit. Or, you can buy them in prepaid packs that bring the effective rate down to roughly 0.8 of a cent, which is great because it allows you to scale usage dynamically. Then you have Plane 3, which is the Azure extension tail. As soon as your Copilot agents reach past internal M365 data, say they connect to a custom machine learning model or pull data from an external vendor's API, that compute settles in Azure Cost Management.
Yeah.
And finally, Plane 4 is the prerequisite base license. To even run Copilot, you have to be sitting on top of an E3 or E5 base plan. That overhead was probably negotiated years ago, but it is undeniably part of your Copilot total cost of ownership.
Exactly. 4 planes. And here's where the budgeting trap snaps shut. Because these planes do not naturally speak to each other.
But hold on. Compare this to the early days of the cloud migration. We went through this exact same panic 10 years ago, right? Moving from on-premise, fixed-cost server racks to Azure or AWS consumption was incredibly messy at first. Finance hated it because suddenly the bill fluctuated based on web traffic.
I remember it well.
Right, but we didn't abandon the cloud. We adapted. We built FinOps as an entirely new discipline to handle metered consumption. Copilot is just the next iteration of that technological transition. It's moving from static software to dynamic compute.
I have to push back on that analogy, though, because it misses a massive architectural difference. When you move to AWS or Azure, yes, the bill was variable, but the bill shared a single dimension.
What do you mean by a single dimension?
A virtual machine or a database in the cloud has a resource tag, an account ID, or a subscription that ties that variable spend back to a specific engineering team. Copilot spans two entirely different commerce systems. You have M365 Commerce holding the seat licenses and Azure holding the consumption meter, with absolutely no unified allocation key natively connecting them.
Okay, but
To go back to your intro, it's a restaurant where the drinks are billed to Azure, the steak is billed to M365 Commerce, and the receipt doesn't even tell you which department sat at the table. The waiter just hands you a generic credits report that deletes itself every 30 days.
okay, that's a fair critique of the integration. But let's actually look at the food on that receipt. Let's look at the consumption plane itself. Because if we understand how a Copilot credit works, the unpredictability starts to vanish.
Let's hear it.
In late 2025, Microsoft renamed the unit of consumption from messages to Copilot credits, and the base rates are incredibly straightforward. If a user asks a question and the agent replies with a classic predefined answer, basically a pre-written script, that costs 1 credit. If the agent has to author a generative answer on the fly using the large language model, that costs 2 credits.
Right.
That is 1 cent or 2 cents. We are talking about fractions of a fraction of human labor costs.
2 cents is perfectly reasonable, until you hit the grounding surcharge, which is where the meter absolutely explodes. This is the detail that catches every single deployment off guard.
Exactly. When a generative turn pulls live data from the tenant's Microsoft graph, the meter slaps a 10-credit surcharge onto that message. So your 2-credit generative answer instantly becomes a 12-credit grounded answer. The surcharge for checking the data is 5 times the cost of the generative AI actually writing the response.
Well, let's explain why that surcharge exists, because it's not some arbitrary penalty. The Microsoft Graph isn't just a simple SQL database. It is the live, interconnected neural network of your entire company's data.
Sure.
It's every email, every Teams chat, every SharePoint document, and all the permission boundaries that go with them. For a large language model to securely search that vast, unstructured web, retrieve the exact right context, respect enterprise access controls, and then inject it into a prompt, that takes massive, expensive compute. You are paying for a highly secure retrieval-augmented generation engine.
I don't disagree that the compute is heavy. My issue is that the finance team forecasting the budget usually has no idea that a 12-credit transaction is even happening.
But that ignores the single most important mechanism that controls this entire cost model, the zero rating boundary. This is the financial firewall that Microsoft built into the system.
If you use it right.
Right, but if you have a licensed user, someone you bought that $30 flat seat for, and they're interacting with Copilot inside Teams, SharePoint, or the chat interface, that usage falls under fair use. All of those 1-credit classic answers, the 2-credit generative answers, and even those expensive 12-credit graph groundings, they are completely zero rated.
They're free.
Yes, they are free. The meter does not run. The only time that credit meter actually starts spinning is when an unlicensed user interacts with an agent, or when an agent runs autonomously without a human pressing the button.
And that zero rating boundary, as brilliant as it sounds on paper, is exactly what makes the meter so incredibly dangerous in practice. Because autonomous runs are always metered, you are entirely reliant on the architectural perfection of your developers.
Perfection is a strong word.
Well, consider a totally plausible scenario. An internal HR agent is built to help with scheduling and onboarding. The developer misconfigures the agent to run autonomously and pull live tenant data on every single turn just in case it needs the context.
Okay.
Because there is no human in the loop, that zero rating boundary vanishes. Every single time that agent loops, it hits the 12-credit mark instead of the 2-credit ungrounded mark. That is a 6 times cost multiplier running silently in the background. At 1 cent per credit, a compounding loop firing thousands of times an hour creates a massive runaway bill, and no one catches it until the Azure invoice closes at the end of the month.
I see the risk there, but let's zoom out and look at the actual business value.
12 credits equals 12 cents.
If an autonomous agent is executing a complex, data-grounded business action, let's say it's automatically resolving an IT ticket by pulling user identity, checking hardware inventory across the tenant, and executing a provisioning script, 12 cents is an unbelievable bargain.
Yeah, compared to a human.
Exactly. How much does 10 minutes of a level 1 help desk technician's time cost? far more than 12 cents. As long as you instruct the agent precisely, the ROI on that autonomous compute is off the charts.
It is only a bargain if you intended to spend the 12 cents. If you thought you were spending 2 cents for a simple, ungrounded query, and you scale that across 10,000 employees, your budget is suddenly underwater. Which naturally leads us to the core dilemma for FinOps practitioners. If these costs can compound silently in the background, how do we track them?
Right.
And the reality is right now, the standard enterprise tooling is critically flawed. Your traditional SaaS management hubs and your cloud FinOps platforms fail completely here because they stop at the Azure boundary.
But wait, standard cloud FinOps tools read the Azure billing APIs. If the Copilot credits are settling in Azure cost management, why wouldn't those tools pick them up?
They pick up the total dollar amount settling in Azure, sure, but they cannot see across the boundary to the M365 commerce side, which houses all the user identities, the department data, and the flat seat licenses. Microsoft splits your visibility across 4 entirely disconnected native surfaces.
Right. You mentioned the credits report earlier.
Yeah, you have the credits report buried in the M65 Admin Center, you have the Power Platform Admin Capacity View, you have the Copilot Usage Report, and then you have Azure Cost Management. None of them naturally convert the credit consumption to actual dollars in a single unified view mapped to your org chart. And that fragmentation creates what Kessler calls the absolute worst dilemma for allocation, the raw credits law.
Explain that. Because on the surface, raw credits sounds like the most objective metric possible. I mean, a credit is a unit of compute. If one team uses more compute than another, shouldn't they pay a higher percentage of the Azure bill? How does raw credit data distort the truth?
It distorts the truth precisely because of the zero rating boundary you were praising earlier. Let me walk you through it. Imagine your company has 2 departments. Team A is your internal IT support desk. They build a highly complex agent, and their licensed staff uses it interactively all day long to troubleshoot servers.
Okay.
Because it's interactive human-in-the-loop usage, every single massive query is zero-rated, so Team A's raw credit consumption reads as near zero on the meter.
Right, because they are covered by their $30 seat licenses.
Exactly. Now look at Team B. Team B is customer success. They build a much simpler agent, but they face it outward to unlicensed external customers on your website. Because those customers don't have M365 licenses, that usage is never zero-rated. Every single interaction hits the meter. So Team B generates this massive raw credit bill.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, if the finance team just looks at the raw credits report, Team A looks like they cost the company nothing, and Team B looks incredibly expensive. But behind the scenes, Team A might actually be driving infinitely more computational load on the system. If you allocate your budget based purely on raw credits without mapping the seat licenses, you completely distort the true showback of your AI investment. You punish the team driving external revenue, and you give a free pass to internal shadow IT.
That is a really tricky organizational dynamic. But honestly, I think you are viewing a temporary software gap as a permanent crisis. Yes, the native tools are disconnected today. But third-party FinOps tools and SaaS management platforms are aggressively updating their APIs as we speak.
Are they?
Absolutely. This visibility gap is a temporary growing pain of a new product category. Eventually, the APIs will mature, a vendor will build the unified dashboard that joins M365 to Azure, and this split invoice problem will be solved by software. We don't need to panic, we just need to wait for the tooling to catch up.
That assumes this is just a bug, rather than a structural product design. Microsoft intentionally built 2 separate commerce systems over 2 decades. The native M365 reports, like the credits report, don't even convert credits to dollars because that system doesn't know your Azure Enterprise discount rate.
Well, sure, they don't have the AA rates natively.
What's worse, the credits report caps its history at 30 days in preview, and it doesn't even auto-refresh. If a FinOps practitioner doesn't manually export that data, stitch it to cost management via billing policies, and map it to user identity and department today, that historical data is permanently lost. You cannot wait 6 months for a third-party vendor to fix a structural data boundary while your company bleeds margin every 30 days.
And to be clear, sophisticated enterprise teams are not waiting. If you read Kessler's manual, the organizations succeeding with Copilot aren't just sitting around hoping Microsoft updates an admin portal. They are actively taming the architecture, and they are doing it by realizing that the most powerful FinOps tool isn't a billing dashboard at all. It's the agent's instruction block.
That is a massive paradigm shift for finance. You are talking about workload optimization rather than rate optimization.
Precisely. In the old cloud world, if your bill was too high, finance would call procurement and try to negotiate a better per gigabyte rate with the vendor. With Copilot, you don't optimize the workload by haggling over the 1 cent credit cost. You optimize it by opening the agent's developer studio and editing its behavioral instructions. Kessler outlines 5 specific design levers that teams can pull to regain control of the meter.
Let's actually walk through what those levers look like in practice, because this is where the theory hits the road.
Sure. A basic lever is routing finite, predictable queries to classic one-credit paths. If an employee asks the HR bot, "What are the company holidays?" the AI shouldn't use an expensive 2-credit generative model to hallucinate a response. You hard-code a deterministic path so it triggers a classic 1-credit answer.
Makes sense.
Another lever is applying grounding restraint. You explicitly instruct the agent only to pull the 10-credit live tenant data when absolutely necessary, rather than on every single turn. But the most powerful lever of all, and this is where the unit economics get wild, is swapping agent actions for agent flow actions.
Oh yeah. The arithmetic on that swap is genuinely the closest thing to a magic trick in this entire architecture. Let's run the numbers on that.
Let's do it. When you build an agent, you can give it an action, say, evaluating a customer's email, deciding what database to query, and executing a response. Because that requires the large language model to use deep reasoning to decide what to do next, Microsoft bills that agent action at 5 credits each.
5 cents a pop.
Exactly. However, if you realize the task is repetitive, you can batch those deterministic steps into an agent flow action, which is basically a pre-programmed script. You take the AI thinking out of the loop. When you do that, it bills at 13 credits per 100 actions. That is 0.13 credits each.
It is staggering.
Moving an action from 5 credits down to 0.13 credits is roughly a 38 times cost reduction. You aren't changing the business outcome at all. You are just using better prompt engineering and architectural routing. That alone proves this cost is highly controllable if you understand the mechanics.
I will grant you that the mathematics of those design levers are brilliantly sound, but I have to issue a warning for any IT or finance lead listening right now. Optimizing prompts and shifting to flow actions is entirely irrelevant if you haven't spent the initial rollout phase building the cross-invoice reconciliation pipeline.
How so?
A 38 times cost reduction on a back-end process means absolutely nothing if your finance team cannot actually see the resulting savings on the allocated bill. You are optimizing in the dark. And that is why Kessler's 90-day cost control rollout framework is the only responsible way to survive this deployment.
The rollout framework is the antidote to the chaos. Now, we obviously can't give away the granular deployment scripts and exact PowerShell commands here. Practitioners need to reference the text for that. But the phasing of the framework is incredibly logical. The first phase, days 1 through 30, is purely about visibility. The mandate is just see it. You stand up the manual export pipeline to grab the M365 usage data before that 30-day history cap deletes it.
Right, because you cannot allocate a number you cannot read. Once you secure the data, days 31 through 60 are allocate and control it. This is where you map the data. Instead of using one massive billing policy for the whole company, you scope your billing policies per department.
Which is crucial.
It is the single native hook Microsoft gives you to tie Azure metered consumption back to a specific business unit. By day 60, you produce your first true showback report, proving to the CFO that you can actually join the flat seats to the metered credits.
And finally, you reach days 61 through 90, forecast and cut it. Now that you have real data mapped to real teams, you run the Copilot Studio Agent Usage Estimator. You calibrate it against your pilot data, you build a probability band for the metered credits, and you execute the design audits we just talked about, swapping those 5 credit actions for the 0.13 credit flows.
It is an incredibly rigorous framework. But look at what it requires. It requires total organizational discipline. Finance, IT, and developers have to work in lockstep to manually reconstruct an invoice that Microsoft refuses to build for you, and they have to do it every single month.
Which brings us to our final positions. If there is one thing we've established, it's that Copilot's architecture absolutely rewards technical discipline. Yes, it has moved away from the comforting simplicity of a flat-rate SaaS license into a highly sophisticated consumption model, but the mechanisms make sense once you look closely.
If you look closely.
Right. If you understand the rate card, if you leverage the zero rating boundaries to protect your licensed users, and if you optimize your agent instruction blocks using those design levers, the return on investment is undeniably massive. This isn't a trap. It is simply the cost of doing modern AI business, and FinOps teams possess the exact skills needed to manage it.
And my position remains a structural warning. Assuming Copilot is just a $30 flat software license is borderline financial negligence. It requires an entirely new operating model to join 4 disparate bills across M365 Commerce and Azure. The fundamental cost of your deployment is now driven by granular architectural choices that finance traditionally has zero visibility into, like whether an internal bot grounds on tenant data or whether a developer uses an action versus a flow. If you do not build the manual reconciliation pipeline first, you will absolutely face an allocation crisis.
You know, despite coming at this from completely different angles, it seems we have converged on some hard-won common ground. Copilot's cost is entirely manageable, but only if you possess the precise rate map, understand exactly why the zero rating boundaries function the way they do, and execute a strict phased rollout playbook from day one.
I completely agree. It is manageable if you do the work. And to actually execute that playbook, listeners need more than just the high-level theory we've discussed today. If you are an IT finance lead or a CFO looking down the barrel of this deployment, you need the actual formulas. You need the exact allocation templates, the pre-flight credit estimate worksheets, and the step-by-step instructions for that 90-day plan.
Absolutely.
For that, you have to go to the source text. You need to read Matthew Kessler's The Real Cost of Copilot. The arithmetic to save your budget is all in there, but you are the one who has to apply it.
We will leave it to the FinOps practitioners listening to build their own operating models and decide if the ROI justifies the complexity for their specific deployments. Just remember the reality we started with. The clean, comforting arithmetic of a traditional SaaS license is gone. In its place is a highly capable AI meter that never sleeps. Will your architecture control it, or will it control your budget?